Did you ever look at your fantasy football roster on a Monday morning and immediately want to assume the fetal position? Whether it's underperforming studs, more injuries, there's some upcoming bye weeks, whatever it may be. The fact of the matter is this, they all lead to more mother F-bombs. But there is a little bit of a silver lining here in 2024. It's that almost every week this season, there has been a player on the waiver wire that has popped off the following week. Who could those players be in week 6? We're talking about it right now. What is going on, Headliner Nation? Hopefully everyone is doing well out there today as we dive into week 6 fantasy football. I can't believe we're already to week 6. Now, before we get into the waiver wire sections, we're also going to go through some of the newest injuries, 5 things we learned from week 5, and the teams that are on upcoming bye. Now, let's go ahead and start off with the injuries first. Right off the bat, Devon Achane suffered a concussion. Now, his bye week is upcoming, so that is definitely a good thing. Great timing. Never a good timing to be concussed, but I guess if you're going to get one, having your bye week the following week is probably the best available time. How about Nico Collins? This one absolutely blows. He suffered a hamstring injury, and do not be surprised if he misses a little bit of time. As of right now, they're listing him as day-to-day. Zach Moss, he went down with an ankle injury, and dude is trying to play his way through it so he doesn't lose his job to stud running back Chase Brown. How about Aaron Jones? He's dealing with a hip injury, another player that has an upcoming bye week though, so we're paying close attention to Aaron Jones and Ty Chandler. We'll talk about him in just a little bit. How about David Njoku? He just came back. Then he suffered a knee sprain. He came back long enough to see how bad this overall offense is in Cleveland and was like, peace, I'm out, I'm hurt again. But then we also need to pay attention to Ramondre Stevenson, who suffered an ankle injury late in week 5. Now, a lot of people are saying that it's not major, he should be able to make it back. A lot of those same people said the same thing about Joe Mixon, and we haven't seen him in a couple weeks. We'll definitely have to pay close attention to the practice reports in New England this week so we can find out what's going on, if anything, with Ramondre Stevenson. But now let's dive in to a few things that we learned in week 5 of fantasy football. The first thing being, everyone talks about Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors, and deservedly so, but not enough people are talking about Brian Thomas Jr. in Jacksonville. 8+ targets in 3 straight ball games, touchdowns in 3 of his last 5 games, receptions of 30 yards or more in 3 of the 5 games he's played. He is quickly becoming the top target in Jacksonville. Now, maybe that doesn't excite a lot of you, but Jacksonville's defense isn't exactly great. They're playing from behind a lot, which means they're throwing the ball a lot. Gabe Davis is non-existent. Christian Kirk's still the binky, but the big play guy in this offense is going to remain Brian Thomas Jr. We loved him in the pre-draft process, and we're starting to see exactly why. Next thing we learned, it doesn't matter who quote unquote starts the game in the NFL. Now, we talked about this during the live stream. I even made eye contact for a long time to the camera and told a lot of people, it does not matter who starts a ball game in the NFL. It is all about touches. And a lot of people got caught up in the nonsense of Antonio Gibson being named the starter in week 5. Ramondre Stevenson still went out and out-touched Antonio Gibson 16-7 before leaving with injury. That number could have been a bigger gap had Ramondre Stevenson even stayed in the game. So don't get caught up with all that verbiage that really means nothing in fantasy football. I mean, look at Zach Moss. Chase Brown isn't the starter, and he's putting up great points. And that's just one example. It's all over the NFL right now. There are a ton of players that aren't necessarily the starter that are putting up great fantasy production. Next up, I told you not to give up on big name players too early, and yet our comment section over the last 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, has been absolutely filled with people that are giving up on Zay Flowers, Brandon Ayuk, even DeAndre Swift a couple weeks ago, and now a lot of these players are popping off and people are like, crap, I kind of gave up a little bit early. I mentioned in a video a week or 2 ago that the cream always rises to the top, and that's exactly what's going to happen here with a lot of these players. You cannot just look at surface stats. Try to understand why some of these players maybe didn't perform early on, and then see if that's something that can continue or is more than likely going to change as the season progresses. Because the writing was on the wall for all 3 of those players to really have a big bounce back at some point, and now we're finally starting to see it. Next thing we learned, you need to be happy if your tight end can score you 8 fantasy points a week. And seriously, 8 points a game is enough to have a top 10 fantasy tight end right now. This position in fantasy football has never been this much of a crapshoot through the first 5 weeks of the season. At this point, if you're looking for a tight end, just chase volume. We're trying to find guys that at least have an opportunity to make a reception. Now, you'll always hear us say a lot of times it's not just volume, it's the quality of the volume, but at this point, at the tight end position, I don't care, I just want targets. And then lastly, last thing we have learned here from week 5 is Deshaun Watson is only starting for the Cleveland Browns because the Browns do not want to deal with the heat from the media. If he did not get paid what he got paid, he would be benched by now. He's averaging the worst numbers of his career in almost every single metric this season. Now, is Jameis Winston the answer that's going to come lead the Browns to the Super Bowl? Probably not. But is he going to play worse than what we've seen from Deshaun Watson? I really don't think so. But how can you have a player that you paid the way that you paid Deshaun Watson and then you just bench him for Jameis Winston? It's a super tough situation. Maybe the Browns are trying to tank a little bit so they can draft a rookie quarterback under a rookie contract, really give him an opportunity, and they're not eating up 2 huge salaries. I don't know what it is, but Deshaun Watson is not playing great football. And if we really want to be honest with each other, he hasn't played great football consistently since he's come back. But all right, now let's transition over to the week 6 buys. We have 4 teams that are going to be on a bye this week. The first one up is the Kansas City Chiefs. No Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Kareem Hunt, and so on. The Rams, really the only one that people are using consistently right now is Kyren Williams, maybe Colby Parkinson at the tight end position, but we will not have them in week 6. Then we have the Dolphins on bye. Devon Achane, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Raheem Mostert. Obviously that offense is disgusting right now, but they definitely need a week off. Let's see if they can figure something out after the bye week. And then also the Vikings, Sam Darnold, Aaron Jones, Justin Jefferson, they will not be available in week 6, so be sure to throw them on your bench and try to find other options. Which is going to take us to the waiver wire section. Now let's start off at the quarterback position. The first one up is Caleb Williams of the Chicago Bears. Still shows he's only owned in 45% of leagues. Now I know a lot of people out there don't agree with the ownership percentages. I'm sorry, write a letter to ESPN or Sleeper. This is what they're publishing, but only owned in 45% of leagues now with a matchup this week going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now he has scored 19 plus fantasy points as Caleb Williams in 2 of his last 3 games played. He's actually thrown for over 300 yards and had 2 touchdowns in 2 of the last 3 games he's played. And now a matchup going up against Jacksonville. They allow the most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks at 23.1 per contest. Then we have Justin Fields, who's now owned in 75% of leagues, but I am still going to mention him just due to the matchup that they have this upcoming weekend. Maybe he's available for you out there in your league. He's scored at least 15 fantasy points now in 3 straight ball games, and now a matchup going up against Las Vegas. They allow the 11th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and we know that Justin Fields has that rushing upside. And then, dear Lord, I have included Daniel Jones on a waiver wire show. This is a surefire reason that the world is about to end, that Daniel Jones is being recommended by me in a waiver wire show, but honestly, the guy has deserved it here as of late. A matchup this upcoming week going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. He's scored 18 plus fantasy points now in 3 of his last 4 ball games, 6 touchdowns over his last 4 games, only 1 interception over his last 4 games, which is crazy. And now more than likely, he's going to get Malik Neighbors back in week 6 going up against Cincinnati. They allow the 5th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. If you need somebody this week, Daniel Jones may be that guy. And then lastly, Joe Flacco. Only owned in 6% of leagues. And really, I just don't think a lot of people know what to expect. Is it going to be him? Is it going to be Anthony Richardson? But let me put it this way. If Joe Flacco starts, he is a high ceiling quarterback option every single week. Obviously, if Anthony Richardson starts, Joe Flacco has no value. So don't just go out there and grab Joe Flacco and just think that you're good to go for this week. We have to pay attention to whether or not Anthony Richardson is going to return to the Colts. If he does and he's going to start the game, Joe Flacco probably should just be left on the waiver wire. Now, how about the running back position? Got 12 guys here on the list today. Chase Brown, I have included him on this list for weeks. He was even my self-res pickup of the week last week. He's still only owned in 66% of leagues. So for the 34% of you that don't own him, what the hell are you doing? Now he's got a matchup this week going up against the New York Giants. He's got back-to-back ball games of at least 14 fantasy points, and Zach Moss is dealing with an ankle injury. If he's out there, I would grab him if I were you. What about Tyrone Tracy? He's only owned in 18% of leagues. Now a matchup upcoming against the Cincinnati Bengals. We saw Devin Singletary go down and Tracy get the start here in week 5. And he steps in and gets 130 total yards and looked pretty good. Really no reason for them to rush Devin Singletary back. Then we got Tank Bigsby of the Jacksonville Jaguars, only 10% owned, and now he has a matchup this week, a tough matchup, going up against Chicago. And we just saw something from Tank Bigsby that we haven't really seen a lot of over his career. Was it a fluke, or did he just take advantage of an opportunity? Because for his career, he's averaging 2.6 yards per carry. Over the last 2 weeks, he's averaging 9.5 yards per carry. Now, sure, he's earning more volume in this offense, but can we rely on 9.5 yards per carry every single week for the rest of the season? No, probably not. Is he somebody that I want to pick up and start right away in week 6? No, but if you own Travis Etienne, you better damn well have Tank Bigsby by now. How about Bucky Irving, another guy we've talked about on this show forever, only 57% owned now, a matchup this week going up against the New Orleans Saints. He had a costly fumble in week 5, but the team went right back to him afterwards, which is a great sign. He's still a guy getting right around 10 plus touches a week, so that really can't be ignored. How about Roschon Johnson? Only 11% owned in a matchup this week going up against Jacksonville, and honestly, he's really a touchdown-dependent type of running back now. Obviously, the last couple weeks, he's gotten those touchdowns. 3 touchdowns over the last 2 ball games, but he only has a total of 51 yards over those 2 games. If he doesn't find the end zone, he's killing your fantasy team. Not somebody I'm going to pick up and start right away, but maybe you can pay attention to him a little bit more, especially if you have DeAndre Swift. How about Antonio Gibson of the Patriots? He's only owned in 37% of leagues, which is crazy. I would have expected a lot more people to pick him up, given the fact that a lot of people were panicked last week about Ramondre Stevenson not being the starter. But now we know that Mondre is banged up. Does he miss any time in week 6? Because if he does, Antonio Gibson is in line for increased touches and should be added. How about Trey Sermon up next? And honestly, this one has a lot to do with Jonathan Taylor. Sermon right now is 50% owned, but he really worked out as expected. He wasn't going to be some super highly efficient running back that was going to get every touch in this backfield. He was going to split touches, and his touchdown opportunity was really tied to the fact that Joe Flacco was the starting quarterback. If this turns into Anthony Richardson, the value of Trey Sermon is definitely going to go down. What about Braylon Allen of the New York Jets? He's going up against Buffalo. This entire Jets offense just looks bad. They are literally doing the same exact thing every single week, despite it not working every single week. The offense is vanilla, and a lot of these stud players are just not getting a great opportunity. Then I had to include Ty Chandler on the list. He's 35% owned, and yes, he is going to be on bye in week 6. Jake, why did you include him in your week 6 waiver wire if he's not even playing? Well, we know that Aaron Jones is dealing with a hip injury, and now that we have a bye week that is upcoming, a lot of people may not pay attention to a player who's on bye because his projected point total is going to say 0. And this right here is one of those proactive moves. Grab him now a week early, and then let's see what happens with Aaron Jones instead of having to try to fight the waiver wire next week when the Vikings play again. In fact, you know what? I'm going to make Ty Chandler my Self-Res pickup of the week. And if you haven't heard by now, Self-Res is an amino acid infused coffee that delivers a lot more than just caffeine. It's made with organic coffee beans, and it includes L-tyrosine, which is known to enhance cognitive function, increase your energy, even improve your mood and reduce stress. Oh yeah. Plus, it's a veteran-owned company, and you know we love to support veteran-owned companies here on this channel. If you love coffee and you're looking for a little bit more of an added boost, head over to selfres.com and throw yourself a lifeline right now. The link is in the description of this video. Go check it out. Now, after Ty Chandler, though, we have Justice Hill, who's currently owned in 32% of leagues with an upcoming matchup going up against Washington. Now, Hill is coming off one of his worst games of the season, but if we know anything, we know that the Washington Commanders can put points up on the board, and in negative game scripts, Justice Hill is highly involved in those games. Obviously, if Baltimore has a big lead or a closer game, we're going to see more Derrick Henry to really pound the rock on the ground. but if Baltimore falls behind, Justice Hill is the guy that we want in the backfield. Therefore, if you're looking for a Hail Mary in week 6, Justice Hill may be available for 2/3 of you out there playing fantasy football. But then we have Isaac Guerendo of the San Francisco 49ers, only 2% owned, going up against Seattle, but we're not going to pick him up and start him. He is really just Jordan Mason insurance right now. And then we have Emmanuel Wilson of the Green Bay Packers. He's been putting up decent numbers for a backup running back. He's only 10% owned, though, in a matchup going up against Arizona. He really is another one of those guys that we're not going to pick up and start, but he is Josh Jacobs insurance for your fantasy football team, which will then get us through running backs. We'll move on to wide receivers now. In the first one, we're going full Mooney once again. Darnell Mooney, he's owned in 70% of leagues. He should be owned in 100% of leagues, especially this week going up against the Carolina Panthers. We've been talking about Darnell Mooney forever. He's been a sell high candidate for us for weeks, and a lot of people don't understand that. Well, if you have Darnell Mooney on your roster, more than likely you picked him up off the waiver wire at some point this season. If your team doesn't have an immediate need for Darnell Mooney and he's just wasting away on your bench, you can trade him away right now for a lot to get whatever it is you do need on your roster to make your overall team better. As of right now, he's a weekly flex play if needed. He just had 16 targets, 9 catches, 105 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and is going to have a target share weekly. He has been a great waiver wire find for so many people. If you need him, use him. If you don't, find something for him that actually helps your fantasy football team. What about Wan'Dale Robinson up next? He's 63% owned now, going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. He's got 8+ targets in 4 of the 5 games this season, and actually, I like him better when Malik Neighbors is in the game because Wan'Dale Robinson doesn't get as much defensive attention, and he can rack up even more receptions. How about Jalen Tolbert? I told people last week to grab Jalen Tolbert. I put a video out on Friday as a late season sleeper. Jalen Tolbert was in that video, and then he comes out and has a career game. Now he's only 8% owned. So 8% of the people listened. But now they have a matchup going up against Detroit this week. And last week we saw Jalen Tolbert get 10 targets, 7 catches, 87 yards, and a touchdown. And Brandon Cooks is still going to miss more time. How about Dontavian Wicks? And honestly, my heart hurts from everyone who started Dontavian Wicks because of me. He is 53% owned. He has a great matchup this week going up against Arizona, but there is some silver lining here. He led the team in targets. He played in 76% of the offensive snaps, and he just barely missed a couple big plays. Honestly, what I keep telling myself is, he had the same amount of catches as Marvin Harrison Jr., who was ranked way higher, and he had the same amount of total yards as Deebo Samuel, so things could have been worse. But then after him, I have Tank Dell, and I know he's owned highly in a lot of leagues, but 18% of you out there watching, he may be available. He's currently 82% owned in a matchup going up against New England. With Nico Collins dealing with a hamstring injury, that's going to open the door for more Tank targets. So go out there and take a look. A lot of people were frustrated with him to start the season. He may have been dropped in your league. Maybe not, but still, go take a look for it. How about Michael Wilson of the Arizona Cardinals? He's only owned in 12% of leagues. He's got a matchup going up against Green Bay. You know that Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to get that top defensive coverage, and because of that, Michael Wilson is turning into an option right now. He's had at least 6+ targets in 3 straight ball games, and Kyler Murray is looking for him down the field. How about Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts? He's 35% owned. Now a matchup going up against Tennessee in week 6. Honestly, he is directly tied to Joe Flacco. If Joe Flacco is the quarterback, Josh Downs is a weekly start with a safe floor. If Anthony Richardson starts the ball game, I'm really not as interested in Josh Downs if that's the case. How about Demario Douglas of the New England Patriots? He's 23% owned right now in a matchup going up against Houston. He really is more of a safer flex option, especially in full PPR leagues. He's had 9 targets in 2 of the last 3 games he's played, but we know that New England doesn't get a whole lot of scoring opportunities, so that really keeps the ceiling low for Demario Douglas, really why he's more of a PPR option. How about Trey Tucker of the Las Vegas Raiders? He's 17% owned in a matchup going up against Pittsburgh. He's getting those weekly deep shots, which is great, but the quarterback play right now in Las Vegas is highly inconsistent, and it's really not helping out the likes of Trey Tucker. But we also know that we still have the drama going on with Devontae Adams. Whatever happens there, we should see increased targets going the way of Trey Tucker. Hopefully they get more catchable in the future. Then we have Allen Lazard of the Jets. He's 38% owned, going up against Buffalo. 8+ targets now in back-to-back ball games, and has 4 touchdowns on the season. He really is where Aaron Rodgers looks right after Garrett Wilson. He's really the binky right now of Aaron Rodgers. Allen Lazard probably deserves to be on a lot of benches right now as a potential bye-week fill-in or something like that for your fantasy football team. How about Alec Pierce of the Indianapolis Colts? I had to include him because if I didn't, I'd have people all over the comment section wanting to know why. He's only 15% owned, and really, this is 100% similar to Josh Downs. They are tied to Joe Flacco. Do we really want to start Alec Pierce with Anthony Richardson and Josh Downs in the mix? No, we really don't, because Alec Pierce is very big play dependent. He only has 5 receptions total over the last 3 weeks of the season. He's not a volume guy, so he needs big-time touchdowns. I trust that coming from Joe Flacco a lot more than I trust it coming from Anthony Richardson. Then we have Keon Coleman of the Buffalo Bills. He's currently owned in 57% of leagues in a matchup this week going up against the Jets. Not somebody we're going to grab and start right away, but definitely somebody we can grab and stash because his target share is going to increase as the season goes on. They're throwing him the ball deep down the field a lot. Now, obviously, that's not something you can rely upon weekly, but it could definitely raise his floor if he's getting one of those big plays each and every week. In a matchup this upcoming week against Sauce Gardner, maybe we're not tempting it here in this week, but it could be a late season stash. Then we have Ray McCloud of the Atlanta Falcons, only 7% owned in a matchup going up against Carolina. Really more of a low-end flex in PPR leagues as well. He's had 7+ targets now in back-to-back ball games and now gets a matchup going up against Carolina. Love that. And then lastly, Darius Slayton. And this one is very difficult because a lot of people want to know about Darius Slayton as well. He's only 4% owned in a matchup going up against Cincinnati, but really the reason he produced what he did in week 5 is because Malik Neighbors was not on the field. Now in week 6, when Malik Neighbors returns and we still have Wan'Dale Robinson, that doesn't mean that Darius Slayton isn't going to get anything, but he's definitely not going to go out there and get double-digit targets with those other 2 wide receivers in the mix. If you're looking for a deep bench stash though, Darius Slayton should be considered. Because if week 5 taught us anything, it's that if Wan'Dale Robinson or Malik Neighbors go down at any point this season, Darius Slayton could be an immediate flex play for your fantasy football team. Which will then bring us to the tight end position, the football kind, of course. And we got 5 guys here we're going to talk about. The first one has to be Tucker Kraft. He's 70% owned, highly owned in fantasy football. I get that. But for 30% of you out there, you may have a top 5 or 10 tight end sitting on your waiver wire that you need to grab right now. He's now the tight end 3 overall on the season and has back-to-back games of at least 14 fantasy points, has that big play upside. He's not really like a Pat Fryermuth who's just going to rack up a few receptions underneath. No, Tucker Kraft has the ability, which we just saw in week 5, to take a shorter pass the distance. Then we have Dalton Schultz, who's 54% owned as of right now in a matchup going up against New England, and he saw a season high in targets after the Nico Collins hamstring injury. If Nico misses time, Dalton Schultz sees more targets. Remember what we said earlier. We're just looking for targets at the tight end position. Then we have Cade Otton of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's only 17% owned. They're going to be playing in New Orleans this upcoming week, and he's had at least 5.5 fantasy points in 3 straight ball games. Now, I know 5.5 points absolutely blows, but at the tight end position, that makes him verge top 12. Then we have Tyler Conklin. He's 37% owned in a matchup upcoming against the Buffalo Bills, and he's got 6+ targets now in 3 straight games, even though his yardage totals really aren't that high, and he doesn't get a whole lot of touchdown looks. 6+ targets a week at the tight end position. We'll take a chance on it. And then Jatavian Sanders. This one right here is a desperation play if you have no other options. He's only 1% owned right now, and Tommy Tremble, the starting tight end of the Carolina Panthers, could miss week 6. If that's the case, Jatavian Sanders has an opportunity to get more targets. He saw a season high in targets after Tommy Tremble left the game, but like I said, he's not some safe start going against Atlanta. He's more of a desperation play if you need it. As for a couple defenses, if you're needy out there for that, we got the Eagles, the Broncos, and the Chargers. The Eagles, they're coming off their bye week, and now they get a matchup going up against Cleveland, whose offense has not looked great. They're only 10% owned right now because they were on their bye week. Then we have the Denver Broncos. They're 80% owned. They're highly owned in fantasy football. and deservedly so. They're one of the better fantasy defense. They've scored 10 plus fantasy points now in 4 of the 5 games they've played this season, and the Chargers aren't some offensive juggernaut by any means. See if they're available out there. And then lastly, their opponent, the Chargers, in that game. They're only 17% owned. They're going up against Denver. Now, the Chargers have scored at least 8 fantasy points in 3 of their 4 games this season. They're coming off the bye week, and the Denver offense is really hit or miss. Which then only leaves us the section of players to drop, and we're going to have to handle this section a little bit differently here in week 6. Between all the injuries, the underperforming studs, and the bye weeks, I can't just blindly name players here this week for you to drop. It kind of gives you a false sense of security. The players that I'm listing may be players that you actually need, and you may not have better options on your waiver wire. So this is what I want to do for week 6. I need you to leave a comment down below. What player do you want to drop? And what player can you pick up in their place? I'm going to stay glued to the comment section of this video, because before I just tell you who you can drop, I need to know who you're able to pick up in their place as well. I really want to make sure that we stay in the habit around here of trying to help each other learn the game of fantasy football instead of blindly following graphics. If I'm being honest, I hate graphics on YouTube channels because a lot of people don't even listen to what is being said. They're just scrolling through and looking at pictures like this is Instagram. If you want to find success in this game, you got to do more than just look at pictures. So leave me those comments down below, and I'm going to try to help you out with your team as much as I possibly can. Now, if you enjoyed today's show, do me a favor by hitting the like button right now and consider subscribing if you haven't already. I don't care that we're up until week 6 of the season. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time to do so. Because if you do, I'll make you a deal. You subscribe, I continue to drop bangers each and every week. But I'm going to go ahead and get out for the day. Hopefully you enjoy the rest of your day, though. And then most importantly, do your part to make the world a better place.